Hey, you. You're finally awake.
For all of you who didn't just get a flashback to one of the greatest RPGs of all time, my condolences. But whether you're a connoisseur of the fine video games or fine literature, welcome back to Chris Story Studios. When we last left off, the author of this book had played a cruel joke on his readers by ending with yet another cliffhanger. Seriously, someone should stop that guy. Let's check back in with CJ to see if he survived his ordeal, or if this story will be a lot shorter than expected. Chapter 7. Strangers. CJ fought to take a breath, but the darkness continued to strangle him. Its cold, relentless grasp pulled him downward. So, this was death, drowning in the unsearchable shadow. Suddenly, the pain in his chest sharpened, becoming worse than anything he could have imagined, and the blood-curdling scream that met his ears was his own. All his senses came back in that moment. The cold embrace of the void was replaced by the touch of warm air. He tried to claim some of it, but his lungs were still bound tight. CJ opened his eyes, but they refused to adjust. Shapes floated over him, cast in shadow by the blinding lights above. He tried to move, but something held his arms at his sides. He fought to sit upright, but strong arms pinned his shoulders down. Beneath him, he finally became aware of the cushions of a bed. When his head was forced back down, a soft pillow rose to meet him. The chains that held his lungs captive fell free, and he began gulping down air in a panic. A dozen different voices all murmured above him, overlapping one another in an endless cacophony. Finally, his eyes began to adjust. The floating shapes from before became faces. The blinding lights above turned into a chandelier. There was a woman on either side of his bed, pinning his arms at his sides and pressing firmly on his shoulders to keep him down. "Be still, child. You're safe now," one of them said, her voice reminding him of his mother. He still tried to wrestle free, but it was no use. It took all his strength just to lift his head. The world was fully back in focus now. There were 5 people standing over him, and beyond them stood an arched ceiling high above. Besides the 2 women fighting to keep him down, another stood off to one side with her hand hovering over his chest. The 4th face was one he recognized, though it took him a moment to realize it. It was the man with the glass sword, a guardian, the Black Knight had called him. And at the foot of the bed stood an elderly man. CJ peered past the people to see a white curtain hung all around them, hiding the rest of the room from view. They had fallen silent at his waking, somber faces growing softer. CJ did his best to get his breathing under control as they continued to stare at him. He had stopped screaming somewhere along the way, his voice caught in his throat as he tried to make heads or tails of what he was seeing. Then his gaze fell to the woman who wasn't holding him still. She was contorting her fingers in a strange pattern a couple inches above his bare chest. Blood leaked from a long slash across him, almost from his collarbone to the opposite side of his abdomen. It didn't appear to be deep, but the skin surrounding it was a sickening yellow. "What are you doing to me?" CJ asked, trying to break free from their grasp. "Keep him steady, Nerva," the woman tracing the pattern said. Her eyes never left his wound, and her fingers never stopped moving. "He's not out of the woods yet." The women on either side of him tightened their grip, giving him no wiggle room. His gaze swept back to the hand dancing over the gash in his chest. But as he stared at it, a faint glow appeared around her fingers. No, not just her hand. All of her was now outlined in a soft, light green glow. Threads of the same color extended from the tips of her fingers, weaving over his wound. He had stopped his struggling now, captivated by the sight. As she continued from one end of the cut to the other, the skin seemed to be healing itself. By the time she reached the end, the slice that had been there before was replaced by a white scar that looked healed years ago. The burning in his chest subsided, and the woman stepped away from him. She wiped her glistening forehead with the corner of her scarlet shawl. "Nasty work that was. A few more seconds and he would have been a goner," she said absently, almost falling into a chair that CJ hadn't noticed before. "Who are you? Where am I?" CJ asked, now trying to tug free from their grasp again. They weren't holding him as firmly as before, but his arms were still pinned to his side, and they wouldn't let him sit upright. "You need to stay down. Your body doesn't have the strength right now," one of them said. He noticed then that both the other women wore the same scarlet shawl as the first, though that was where the similarities ended. He couldn't look at any of the people for too long, though. If he did, the same faint glow started to emanate from them, the only difference being the color that appeared. For the Guardian, it was a deep red. The elderly man at the foot of the bed had an almost orange glow around him. The woman on his left glowed a baby blue, and the one on his right was almost as scarlet as the shawl draped over her shoulders. And the longer he stared, the more defined the glow became. "Let me go!" CJ demanded, pushing up again. He managed to get his shoulders just off the bed beneath him before the piercing pain in his chest resurfaced. He winced, clenching his teeth to keep from crying out as he collapsed back down. He could feel warm tears running from the corner of his eyes. "Maroon, fetch me something to calm him down," the lady said from the chair. The woman with the red glow slipped out through the curtain, giving CJ a glimpse of the room beyond. He spotted more curtains lining the far wall. The ones that were open revealed cubicles with vacant beds identical to the one he now occupied. The woman who had been in the chair was now at his bedside, pulling the blankets up to his neck. She had fiery red hair with strands of silver mingled in. The scarlet shawl she wore flowed over a long-sleeved white dress that nearly reached her ankles. But her face was what he couldn't quite figure out. Despite the gray in her hair, she looked young enough to be in her early 30s, but those eyes hid a look of wisdom that indicated she was much older. "Calm now, child. My name is Madame Cherish. You must rest. We got enough of the poison out that it won't leave any lasting damage, but you're still too weak to even sit upright." The woman who had left, Maroon, returned from beyond the curtain. She handed Madame Cherish a steaming teacup, who then turned back to him. "Drink this. It will help you fall asleep." She reached out to lift his head up, but he mustered what strength he had to inch away. "I don't want to sleep. I want to go home. Where's my mom?" Even uttering those words sapped the majority of his energy. Drowsiness was tugging at the corners of his mind, but he willed it away. He couldn't sleep surrounded by these strangers. "Kid, you're safe here," the man from the field, the guardian, stepped forward. "You and your friend were in rough shape when I brought you here. Do you remember?" Even as the man spoke, CJ was barely aware of the fact that Madame Cherish was tilting his head up. The mug was at his lips, and warm tea soothed his dry throat. What was he supposed to remember? Did he know who these people were? No, they were strangers. He had to stay awake. He had to... CJ forced his eyes open. He had to stay alert. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't... The room before him had changed. Up above, the chandelier had gone dark, and the only luminance came from behind. He craned his neck to see that the head of his bed was pushed up against gray stone walls. Sconces on the wall held torches, except no fire burned in them. A sphere of soft, white light floated lazily in its place. He turned his attention forward, finding that the curtains were still drawn. But he wasn't alone. The three women were nowhere to be seen, but the others remained. The guardian was pacing around the space, boots echoing as they struck stone. His sandy brown hair was messy, though that was the only part of him that didn't look regal. He had traded the jeans, t-shirt, and jacket for new clothes. His gray pants were tucked into black boots that came up to his shins, and he wore a white silk shirt. The royal blue jacket he sported looked like it was from the Revolutionary War, with silver embroidery of a broken broadsword on one arm and an insignia on the left side. A black and silver scabbard hung from the man's hip, concealing his sword inside. At the foot of the bed, the elderly man sat in a wooden chair. He had to be at least 80 years old, CJ would guess. His gray hair was smoothed back, hanging to the base of his neck. Wrinkled hands clutched the leather-bound book he was reading. His face, though, looked like it could belong to a much younger man, 50s maybe. For that matter, the Guardian had the same issue. At first glance, he looked 20, but then he could be in his late teens or his 30s.
"Ah, good to see you're finally awake,"
the elderly man said, shutting his book and leaning forward in his chair. His white robe was trimmed in gold, and his voice carried the weight CJ could imagine coming from a king.
"How are you feeling, lad?"
"Who are you?" CJ asked. The question came out with a little more bite than he'd intended, but the man didn't seem to mind. "I suppose that's the question anyone in your position would be asking," the man said, almost grandfatherly. "You've awoken in a strange place, surrounded by strange people. My name is Barthasol. I'm an elder here." "And where exactly is here?" CJ demanded. The Guardian stiffened at CJ's tone, but Barthasol waved it away.
"Don't forget yourself, Trevor. This boy is our guest."
"Not a situation he would have chosen under other circumstances, I'd wager. The question is valid," the elder said. He turned to CJ. Something about those eyes seemed to be weighing him. In what way or to what end, CJ didn't know, but he didn't like it. Barthasol smiled all the same.
"Although, boy, you would do well to keep a tighter grasp on your tongue. A careless word can be rather dangerous, and some of the other elders would have demanded more ceremony, even from an outcast."
CJ took turns staring at each of the men before him. He had to look away every so often when the glow started to appear again. He had enough issues at the moment without his stupid hallucinations adding to the list. "Sir, you still haven't answered my question," CJ said. He adopted the same tone he used when apologizing at the principal's office. He'd had plenty of trips to help him perfect it.
"My apologies," Barthasol said. "You, young man, are in Gethrol, It's old speak, translating to Golden Castle or Palace of Light. There's a little confusion on that, even among the most esteemed scholars. Trevor brought you here to keep you from death's door, though you already had 1 foot past it by the time he arrived. Do you remember what happened? CJ ventured a nod, finding that his muscles still ached. It reminded him of the flu, the way even little motions like that took quite some effort. He doubted if he could stand up straight, let alone hop out of bed and run away from these people. There was a fire at my school. Then some guy in dark robes came out of thin air. He sent hobgoblins and misshifters to attack us, he said, remembering what the people called them in his dreams. Both men had kept a pleasant expression up until CJ mentioned what creatures Marul had brought with him. At that, Barthazal's eyes widened slightly. The look of surprise was only a flicker before it was gone again, but Trevor stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Outcast doesn't have misshifters or hobgoblins. How'd you know what they were called? His tone carried the weight of an accusation, and his hands had balled up into fists for a moment before Barthasal waved him off again. Rein in your attitude, Trevor. This boy is not on trial, the elder said. But CJ had the feeling there was an implied yet that went at the end of that sentence. Barthasal turned to him. Although I am quite interested to hear the answer to that inquiry, if you're so inclined. Who talks like that anymore? CJ returned the elder's gaze, stare for stare. Part of them had half a mind to tell them, but then that cryptic note from his locker came to mind. Tell no one about your visions. Of course, that had apparently been a hallucination too, which begged the question, was this still a crazy dream? The pain in his chest seemed real. To others, the scar should have been enough to convince him, but Scene wasn't believing anymore, not with all the weird stuff that had been happening. Perhaps I should not have advised you to hold your tongue, Barthazal said, chuckling almost to himself. If you're uneager to answer that question, perhaps you'd at least oblige us enough to tell us your name? C.J. Blake, he said after a moment of pause. And as soon as the words escaped his mouth, he regretted them. Barthazal's eyebrows shot up, eyes going wide in surprise, and he didn't bother trying to hide it this time. Trevor looked equally caught off guard, taking a step back from the boy. And what's your father's name? The elder asked. CJ shifted his gaze from one man to the other. The question had been asked pleasantly, but with a little too much interest, and while the expression on the man's face didn't demand an answer, it was expecting one. And the way they'd reacted to hearing his name made him nervous. I want to go home, CJ said quietly. He tried to keep his gaze steady, but felt the need to shift when either man started to glow. The elder continued to look at him, though the expectancy was gone. Trevor's eyes had narrowed suspiciously, as if he thought CJ had given a fake name. Maybe he should have, based on the way their demeanor changed. A tight hold indeed, Barthazal said, sounding almost amused. We'll let you rest now, CJ. The hour is late, and your body needs more time to recover. We'll be back to continue this conversation in the morning. Fat chance of that. Barthazal stood to his feet, and Trevor moved to walk beside him. Without another word, they ducked beyond the curtain and disappeared. CJ waited until their footsteps fell silent. As soon as he was sure they were gone, he tried to lift the covers off himself. They felt like 100-pound weights. His body was still too weak to even move some sheets. He definitely wouldn't be able to get out of bed, or even stand if he did. Apparently, he'd have to wait for that conversation after all.
Now, if there's one thing no one ever suspects, it's the Spanish Inquisition. But if there are two things, the second is the old end of third chapter in a row with a cliffhanger trick. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dang, I fell for it again. But there is a secret strategy that could undo the author's treachery. Now, you didn't hear it from me, but rumor has it if you own the book and read it at your own pace, you'll no longer fall victim to the author's schemes. If only there was a way for you to get your hands on it.
Link in description.
It's not in there. The book's not even out yet. I'm doing. Sorry, anyway.
Just say link in description, and then you can just put link in description.
Link in description.
Just start over.
Yeah. If only there was a way to get your hands on the book so you could... Oh. Too much?
Too much sass.
Too much sass. If only there was a way to get your hands on this story so that you wouldn't have to listen to this guy read it. What a shame. Link in the description. Anyway, for those of you who will never see my content again, thank you for giving me the privilege of your time. I wish you well on your internet travels. For the rest of you, I shall see you here next week for Chapter 8 of The Son of Cyrus. Until next time, I have been your host, Mr. Narrator, and this is Chris Story Studios.